For a long hiatus, we finally have a Victoria 3 dev diary, and it's very exciting. I'm always looking forward to seeing what the devs are cooking, although I am sometimes a bit cynical about the game. I do actually care a lot about its development, and it's been a long time, so it's nice to see a developed diary. I get the feeling the reason why it takes so long for these dev diaries is because Victoria 3 just isn't really much of a priority for Paradox, which, how can you blame them when it's one of the lesser played Paradox games? Regardless, I'm going to dive into today's dev diary, or I guess it's yesterday's at this point, because I got to this a little bit late. But the way we're going to structure this is I'm going to be talking, I'm going to have some random gameplay in the background, and when I'm reading from the diary, I will put it up on the screen, and I'll put up sections on the screen as they are relevant to what I'm saying. So, to start, the title of today's Victoria 3 dev diary is Dev Diary 143, Trade Rework, the World Market. To be clear, I have not yet read this diary. I'm reading it blind, so we'll see how it goes. I'm definitely interested in what they have planned for trade, because to me, the ability to make trade a more central aspect of the game unlocks a lot of new playstyles, and unlocks a lot more identity to a particular nation. It's pretty difficult in Victoria 3 right now to be a specialist, in the sense that if you want to be really good at making one particular good, you're kind of just shooting yourself in the foot, because every economy in Victoria 3 is pretty much equally capable of making every good, with the exception of your company choices. But even then, a bit of throughput doesn't really change whether or not you're able to make more of that good. Ultimately, Britain, with its massive GDP, can always make more of every good in the game than something like Bahrain. Even if Bahrain might have a competitive advantage in something, they just can't because of the massive GDP of Great Britain. To be fair, that isn't so far off from reality, but that's not the goal of the game, right? Reality is never the goal, fun is the goal. Anyway, let's actually read the dev diary now. Happy Thursday, and welcome back. After an extended hiatus, we are now returning to regularly scheduled development diaries, the first of which you are reading right at this moment. Very true. Today's development diary is going to be a pretty hefty one, focusing on the complete overhaul of trade that is coming in the 1.9 free update. Before we start, I want to remind you all of the usual caveat that this is a feature in development, so expect some rough-looking interfaces, and for all implementation details and balancing to not yet be fully figured out. So, 1.9 free update. I get the feeling we're not going to see that for a while. If this is a big overhaul update, because it's adding a bunch of stuff to trade, I think we can reasonably expect this update to happen in a couple months, depending on what exactly the nature of the change is. I gotta read this first to get an idea of how big the update is. But development for Vic 3 is sluggish and slow. So I'm gonna tell you this, before we even read anything more, I'm predicting 1.9 comes out in May. Okay, so in 2 months from now. I guess a month and a half, because March is basically over, but you take my point. They go on to say, we have mentioned on a number of occasions that we are not happy with the way trade works in Victoria 3. It is unreliable, overly fiddly, and inherently inefficient since the introduction of local prices and market access price impact in 1.5. Very true. I'm glad to see them acknowledging that that is pretty much the case. Trade can be nice in Victoria 3, but it so often finds itself just not really serving a role in the game. So it's nice to see them saying that it's unreliable, it's inefficient, and overly fiddly. Those are all very true. Establishing any kind of long-term trade relationship with another country is almost impossible due to the constantly shifting market conditions, and on top of all this, the system exists in a confusing limbo where all trade routes are established and paid for by the government via convoys, while the profits usually go into the pockets of private owners. Again, a very good point. Glad to see them addressing the actual issues of the trade. These are some very particular complaints, and I like when they get specific because it means they're paying attention. Many of these issues are inherent to the way trade routes work, and as such aren't easily fixable within the confines of the current system. There really isn't a way to create a reliably profitable trade route with another market when you have no control over the price of the traded good in the other market. Yeah, that's pretty true. Obviously, the outliers are if you're exporting opium to Qing, it's always going to be profitable. That's a pretty reliable trade route. But what they're talking about more is stuff like when you're exporting textiles to Britain, let's say. Because the price can fluctuate so easily and so randomly, it means that your trade route could randomly jump around in size massively. And that is just not very interesting or fun. For this reason, we have decided to start over from scratch. The old system is completely gone, and in its place, we will have not one, but two new systems. One which simulates private, autonomous, profit-driven trade, and another which handles strategic trade between nations. Today we're going to talk about only the former, so while reading all of this, bear in mind that you're only seeing a half of the coin. Direct trade deals between governments very much still will exist in 1.9, they just won't be tied into trade centers and private profits. But enough with the caveats, let's get to the point. Okay, delineating between government trade and private trade is really good to see. Obviously, this entirely depends on how they do it. I've always been a big believer in the idea that a good concept is not always a good idea for a game. I think this sounds great in concept. It's going to depend a lot on how it actually comes into the game as to whether or not it's going to be good. With that, we enter the first sort of section of this dev diary called World Market and Trade Centers. Enter the World Market. Those of you familiar with Victoria 2, that's not me, to be clear, I did not play Victoria 2, will immediately recognize the name, and might even have assumed from the title of this dev diary that we're replacing the national market system in Victoria 3 with the global one and its predecessor. This is not so. The world market in Victoria 3 is not where pops and buildings buy and sell goods, but rather where autonomous trade takes place, and every good traded in the world market has a world market price based on its amount of exports versus imports. You can think of it as existing at a top layer above the national markets, though this is not a completely accurate picture, as you should soon understand. Okay, obviously I didn't play Victoria 2, so I don't have anything to comment about the world market system in that game. I will say that I'm happy that they're not just retreading old ground. One trap I think you can fall into is thinking that because people yearn for the past, it means the past was better. I didn't play Victoria 2, so I'm completely based on conjecture, but the systems in Victoria 2, from what I understand, are really complicated and really hard to understand. People might have nostalgia around them, doesn't mean they were good. That also doesn't mean they were bad, to be clear. Again, didn't play it, so I couldn't actually tell you. But I get the feeling that it's better to try and make something new, which could actually be innovative, as opposed to something old, which may have been carried by the nostalgia factor. Anyway, there's a picture with a caption. It says, "The world market in 1836 in the current build. Remember that everything is very much a work in progress." Okay, so we see there's a bunch of goods here, and they have different little flags for exports and imports, and then a balance. I'm not sure what to glean exactly from this, but it looks like different countries are importing and exporting different things to a particular world market. Now I'm not sure if this is the world market or if it's like a world market. I don't know exactly how that would work because I'm seeing some pretty small numbers here. If you were to show me the world market, I would expect a lot more than, I don't know, 400 clothes or 500 tea, whatever, right? Like, I'm not sure if this is reflective of one particular area or if it's reflective of the whole world, but we'll see, we'll keep reading. So then, how does trade with the world market work? As with the old trade route system, trade centers are still the principal drivers of trade, but the way you interact with them has been turned on its head. Instead of being a building that appears after a trade is created, you now build trade centers to create trade capacity in states, which allows those states to trade with the world market. Each trade capacity allows for a certain quantity of a good to be imported or exported. The amount varies per good. Imported goods are purchased from the world market and sold in the state, and so they are profitable when the goods are cheaper in the world market than the state, but the opposite being true for exports. Okay, so I like the idea that you can make your own trade centers, because first of all, gameplay-wise, it gives you more control over where and how trade happens, but roleplay-wise, it's nice to be able to create centers of trade, to use an EU4 term, but it's nice to have the option to pick where you want your trade to happen. Even if you pick a bad spot, or if you pick a good spot, whatever, it's nice to have control. It's always good to let me decide how something's going to play out in the game, in the world, right? There's a bit more to this, which we'll get into when we talk about trade advantage, but the key thing to remember is that trade uses local state prices, which means it no longer suffers from the inherent inefficiencies of the old system, which was always penalized by market access price impact. It also means that the location of trade centers matters. It's more profitable to import luxury clothes into a state with a large number of wealthy pops, as an example. Interesting they would use that example, because so often, like, do you not bother to import luxury goods? You'd rather make them yourself and then export them? But whatever, I digress. It's just a random note about the way the game is played currently. This definitely is a good change though, and it means that deciding where to put your trade centers will matter, as they mentioned, of course. And I like that again, because assuming that we can build trade centers in multiple states, it's not just going to be a market capital type thing, it means that we can create like specialized states. And what I'm imagining is like you're playing Prussia, and you have control over Silesia, of course, and you decide that you're going to make a bunch of, let's say, steel over there, because there's iron and coal and lumber in Silesia. You could build a bunch of trade centers there, and then export steel directly from Silesia over to, let's say, like Austria or Russia. And by choosing to put your trade center in Silesia, I'm assuming that we're going to get the same sort of migration modifiers that we already get with trade centers, but also in this new version. So we could see like Silesia becoming this cool land-based trade hub, whereas often, I don't know, Pomerania, maybe we produce a lot of rye and as such produce a lot of liquor, and we export the liquor overseas, and that's like a different sort of growing market, you could say. I'm obviously getting ahead of myself here because I don't know exactly where they're going with all this, but I like the idea of being able to build up a particular state like this. It's nice. They next show a picture, and it has the caption, "This trade center in Brandenburg is making a decent profit importing cheap dyes and liquor while exporting some overproduced goods in the Prussian market, but it still has plenty of free trade capacity with which to expand its operation." And the picture shows, it looks like world market access, trade capacity, and then a new good that says MM on it. Looks kind of work in progress type deal. And we see the outputs. So trade capacity, weekly trades, trade advantage, trade revenue. Okay, interesting. So it generates trade revenue, but I'm not seeing in the inputs where the revenue is coming from. We do see tariffs on the input section, which of course makes sense that you'd be paying tariffs when you trade with people. When it says weekly trades, I assume that's akin to like how much of a good gets traded, where trade capacity is how many trade like lines you can have. I don't know. Trade advantage, I assume, is going to be similar to competitiveness in the current patch, where basically if you have two trade routes of a similar size, one of them will grow over the other if the other has the higher trade competitiveness. So maybe it's going to be like that. And I don't know what a subvention is. Maybe we'll get to that later. Trading in trade centers happens autonomously with a number of weekly adjustments based on the weekly trades value created by the trade center, in which they will increase or decrease trade volumes to create profit for themselves. While this process is automatic and autonomous, it's not completely out of player hands, as you can heavily influence trade centers through tariffs and subventions. More on that in a little bit. Unlike in the old system, trade centers are not reliant on convoys or any other government-produced resource. Instead, they purchase merchant marine, which I assume is the MM work-in-progress convoy thing, a new type of good produced by ports, which are no longer government-owned buildings. Right now, the amount of merchant marine consumed by trade centers is static per level, but we are looking into making it dependent on geographic distance to trade partners. As an additional note, both trade centers and ports can now be constructed and privatized and owned by ownership buildings. Okay. So that means that we can kind of see maybe the rise of like private shipping in the sense of like a business that exists only to move goods back and forth, which is pretty nice. That's more or less what the East India Company was, by the way, was literally just like ports. So that's pretty cool. Trade centers being privately owned, I guess, makes sense. I wonder, would the ownership be capitalists or shopkeepers? I guess it'll depend on the production methods being used, if they even have those. By the way, we see another picture coming up. It says, "A detailed look at the Brandenburg Trade Center's imports and exports. You can see the revenue, price difference, relative trade advantage, and principal trade partners for each good." Okay, I kind of like how this UI looks. It doesn't look too bad. So I assume that on the left side, we have the price in your market. And then on the right side, we have the price in the other market that you're trading to. I'm not sure what the percentage is. I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess it could be like trade advantage, or maybe it's price difference. I don't know what it is exactly, but this looks pretty slick. I think that obviously it's work in progress, but assuming that I can find out what the percentage means, I think I understand what this is doing. And then it creates revenue. So we see the export revenue is 0.7, the import revenue is 0.8, and I assume that revenue is paid out as dividends to the financial districts that are in Brandenburg, as it shows here. Oh, the math does not math, though. It says 637 pounds of dividends, but the trade revenue is more than 637 pounds. So maybe some of it is being lost. I don't know what's happening. I guess they could be on, like, interventionism. I don't know what they're doing, but point is that it makes sense. So far, this checks out. Next up is the next section, called the World Market Location. Switching to talk about the world market itself, you might well ask, so where is the world market located? Conceptually, what we say to this is, the world market exists in the sea. In other words, once you have access to the sea, you also have the ability to trade on the world market, though of course it's a bit more complicated than that. To explain more in detail, I first will tell you about something which already exists in the game but is presently quite hidden: market areas. Market areas are chunks of a market consisting of a number of states that are all connected by land or by straits. To give you an example, the Spanish market has several market areas, one for Spain itself, one for Cuba, one for Puerto Rico, another for the Philippines, and so on. Essentially, it seems to me that market areas are the parts of markets that can be isolated. So if you get your convoys raided, then you might lose connection to one of your market areas. That's what it seems to be to me. Prussia, conversely, only has a single market area which contains not only Prussia, but all of the states of the countries in the Zollverein. That makes sense? Because you can't really get cut off from your land trade like that. In order to trade with the world market, a market area must have at least one port, at which point a world market hub will be established. When there are multiple ports in a market area, the hub is chosen based on factors such as port level and state GDP. Hubs are not completely static. but do not generally move around unless a much more suitable candidate state emerges to eclipse the old hub state. We then see a picture, and it says, as the largest port in Spain, Western Andalusia is also the world market hub for its capital market area. And then we see a little symbol with a globe and a market, and we can see another market area on the diaries there. So I think I get what they're going for here. Basically that every single place that can be cut off is going to have its own little world market access. What that's going to mean for the purpose of like local prices, I don't know. Because for example, if I were to do any trading in the world market in Spain, will it use the price of the local price of the good produced as long as it's in the same market area? For example, if I'm making rice in Valencia and exporting the grain, is it going to take the Mappy cut for moving the grain to West Andalusia, or is it not going to? That's going to be very critical for determining where you want to put your world market access. And it'll also be critical for things like different market areas. Because if I have a really good stuff in the diaries that I want to export, then that's good because there's a new port there, so I can get the local market access price impact reduced. But if I don't have that, then maybe I'm going to be upset about it, right? They go on to say that landlocked countries, however, are not left out completely in the cold when it comes to the world market. Aside from being able to utilize national trade deals, which as I said before we're not covering today, they can also negotiate transit rights with a foreign nation in order to be able to trade through their world market hubs. For example, Switzerland could negotiate transit rights with Austria to be able to trade through Venetia, or with Prussia to be able to trade through one of the German ports. I imagine that decision will matter, but regardless, let's keep reading. We will return to talk more about world market hubs in later development diaries when we cover ideas such as blockades, but for now we should continue. Blockades, okay. Interesting idea. Obviously they're not talking about it here, so I won't go on forever. But right now, the way that like blockading a country works is you just burn all their convoys down, and it is the stupidest system ever, not in terms of its concept, but in terms of its implementation. It sucks to protect your convoys, it sucks to kill the enemy's convoys, it sucks to have to build all the convoys. The impact of not caring about your convoys is huge, so you hate it, but taking care of it is so awful that you never do it. I hope that they change how that works to some extent. I don't know what I want it to change to, but the current way that convoy raiding works is disgusting, and I hope it changes. I will add as a final note that one design problem we have currently identified with world market hubs and market areas is that it doesn't make too much sense for huge market areas such as Russia to only have a single hub. And this is something we're currently exploring solutions for. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. It wouldn't make sense for the only world market hub in Russia to be in, like Moscow or in St. Petersburg when like Siberia exists too, right? So we'll see what they do about that. I'm excited to see, but I don't have any ideas off the top of my head right now. While the world market exists in the sea, that doesn't mean that we simply ignore where your exports are going as soon as they get loaded onto a ship. Not all trade partners are equal, and it makes little sense to get the bulk of your clothes imports from an overseas partner if your demand can be met by a closer source. As such, each trade center has a preference weight for every other trade center based on factors such as interests, relations, diplomatic agreements, and of course, geographic distance, and will trade more with higher weight trade centers and less with lower weight ones. Okay, I'm gonna tell you this right now. This is my warning, okay? This will cause lag. I'm sorry, maybe it won't. Maybe the devs are getting better at optimization. I imagine there will be many trade centers in the game because like world trade hubs are one thing, but within a world trade hub, there's gonna also be trade centers in different states across the entire nation and across the entire market. We can see in the picture they give ahead, they're showing the different hubs that are available. And just for one fabric trade, which with what I assume is France, looking at the flag I can barely see in the top left there, it's considering the trade competitiveness, I'm going to call it, I guess, of like 9 different hubs. That's a lot of numbers to be calculating every single day, maybe every single week. I don't know how they're going to calculate it. But I do not look forward to the lag that's going to cause, if it does cause lag. I do think the devs can find ways around this, maybe. Like, I assume they're not, like, trying to cause lag. But I'm saying, okay, I know the kind of things that cause lag in Victoria 3. Stuff like this is exactly it. All these little minute calculations. We'll see what happens, though. Either way, we move on to the next chapter of the dev diary, which is trade advantage. I have mentioned trade advantage at several points during this development diary, so I figure it's high time I explain it to you. I already explained that there is a world market price for each good, which is high when imports exceed exports and low when exports exceed imports, and which is compared to the state price when determining how much profit a trade center can extract from its trades. However, this is a bit of a simplification. The world market price is the average price for imported and exported goods, while the actual price is modified by a trade center's relative trade advantage to its competitors. Interesting, I'm trying to parse that in my head right now. So what I get a sense of is that there's two parallel prices happening. One is the reality of like perfect economics and free trade, where you take all the imports in the world market and all the exports in the world market and then weigh them against each other, and that gives you a certain price. Then you have to compare that against a new price that is created based on your trade advantage, which will determine how much your particular trade center actually pays or is paid for its trade. That's what I'm understanding. I don't know, I'm not always very good at parsing this kind of text, but that's what I'm seem to understand, is that you have the two parallel prices. And that makes sense to me, because some countries are going to be able to kind of muscle for better prices compared to other countries, but we'll see again how much lag that might cause. My brain is already getting upset at the idea of lag because of all these calculations we're going to have to do. Trade advantage is calculated for each trade center, for each good, in each trade direction. Oh my god, again, the number of calculations. I'm getting scared, guys. Laggiest Victoria 3 update incoming, maybe? Sorry if I'm fear-mongering, I'm not sure if that'll happen, but I'm getting scared. As an example, a trade center in Lancashire will have a certain amount of trade advantage for exporting fabric, which will be different from its trade advantage in exporting coal, and also different from its trade advantage for importing either fabric or coal. Trade advantage is multiplied by the amount of traded units, and then compared to the trade advantage of all other trade centers trading the same goods in the same direction. The higher a trade center's share of global trade advantage compared to its share of global trade volume, the higher its relative advantage, which in turn translates into a better price. Advantage is a zero-sum game. The average price on imports and exports is always equal to the world market price, so any improvement on prices a trade center gains always comes at the expense of its competitors. Okay, so basically, in order to win the trade advantage game, someone else has to lose, and I actually really like that. I think it's good that Victoria 3 leans into more antagonism outside of war. So obviously, I don't think this is going to translate into some kind of new CB or like a relations hit, but I would love to see a situation where like Britain and France, although they're already enemies, but they get even more animosity on account of one of them outcompeting the other for trade and like trying to muscle the other out of a certain trade. That'd be really cool. They haven't mentioned anything like that, so I doubt it's going to happen. It's probably just going to be a matter of price and the AI won't even care about it, but it's a cool idea for sure. I always love Victorian antagonism in ways that aren't just war, because right now the only way you can really mess with someone is to go to war with them for something, or to like stop them from going to war by guaranteeing a country or whatever, right? The point is that war is your only means of antagonism for the most part. But with this system, maybe we can antagonize other countries more effectively with trade. If that explanation sounds confusing, the key takeaway is that high advantage equals better prices, and in turn, the ability to capture a larger share of global trade. Advantage is gained from a variety of factors, such as trade center level, interests in relevant markets, and trade agreements. Regional economics also play a role. The higher the market area's share of global production, the higher its export advantage, and vice versa for consumption and import advantage. Interesting. So the way to get more import advantage is to consume more. Very, very interesting. The problem is that it can be difficult to control how much a good is consumed unless it's like an industrial good. So for example, I want to consume more iron, I make more construction sectors, or I make more steel, or whatever, right? But if I'm importing like clothes, I can see it being very difficult for a nation that doesn't already consume a lot of clothes to gain a lot of advantage. But it could work like the current system, where for example, when you export opium, if there's no opium already present in the market, the trade route will look really, really bad because you can only export 5 units. But then once you export the first 5, then people start buying it and the price goes up, and then you're able to export more and more, right? And it compounds on itself. So it could be something like that. There's then a picture showing some of this system. It says this trade center in Virginia has high trade advantage for exports of iron, fabric, and meat, resulting in more favorable prices. Note that the numbers here don't currently add up due to a bug. Okay, got it. So we see that percentage number on the right side that I was thinking about before, that is the relative advantage for the exports, or for imports, I guess, if you're on the other side. But yeah, okay. So that makes a lot of sense to me. It's based on the amount of local consumption. The next chapter of this dev diary is interacting with the world market. Changing the focus of the discussion a little bit, something I feel I have not always made clear in the past when we change systems to work in a more autonomous or automatic way is how you are expected to interact with it. That's a good point, Wiz. Thank you for bringing that up. Under the old trade route system, this was clear enough. You as the player were the sole arbiter of trade for your country, for ill or good. In the new system, and I remind you again that I am only talking about the world market here, not country-to-country trade deals, which we will cover in a later dev diary, you are expected to make strategic level decisions to capture global import and export shares. When they say strategic, I'm going to assume they mean things like shaping your market to be advantageous for certain trades. Currently, you kind of already do that in Victoria 3, in the sense that if you want to become a better exporter of opium, you don't just click export on opium, you also should be building more opium, which sounds really obvious, but like, you know, that kind of thing is more or less what you do. A better example of being strategic would be like if you want to be a better exporter of iron, you might choose to use less of your local iron so that you can have more to export. That's maybe a better example, but you take my point. As an example, playing as Sweden, you have a lot of potential to produce iron, far more than you could ever use domestically within your limited starting population. A natural course of action, then, might be to build up your trade capacity and try to maximize your trade advantage for exporting iron, leading to greater export volumes and, in turn, creating favorable conditions for expanding your iron production. This maximization of trade advantage can be done in a number of ways. For example, by signing trade agreements with key importers, or by squeezing the competition by unequal treaties on them. Interesting grammar there. Sorry, I get fucked up by bad grammar. More on that particular point later. For now, it will remain mysteriously unelaborated on. Yeah, so this is what I was talking about, like the Victorian aggression, squeezing the competition with unequal treaties. I'm not sure what exactly that'll mean, but I imagine there'll be a war goal that's going to require you to take the enemy's capital. It's going to be really annoying to use and no one's ever going to use it, where you can force trade advantage in a particular direction based on the treaty you enforce on them. I'm sorry for being cynical about like the war goal being annoying. It's just that every single war in Victoria 3 ends up being occupy the enemy capital. I think it'd be really nice if you could enforce an unequal treaty through a blockade. I doubt that's going to happen though. I'm being cynical. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be so cynical. I'm used to having high expectations and being disappointed. I'd rather be a little bit on the cynical side and then see what happens. If Paradox is watching this, by the way, I'm just saying, if we're putting in blockades, whatever that's going to look like in future dev diaries, maybe some war goals could be enforced by blockades. You know, I'm just saying. All right. Regardless, another key tool in your strategic trade arsenal is tariffs and their newly introduced counterpart, subventions. Tariffs are of course already in the game, but now become much more important as they are the principal way by which you can directly influence the decisions made by your trade centers. That's just like in reality too, so it makes sense. Where previously, tariffs for a particular good could only be set to import focus, export focus, or no focus, import and export tariff levels are now set separately, meaning that you can throw up tariff barriers in both directions if you're feeling particularly protectionist about a good. It then shows a picture of the mercantilism law, and it says, your tariff law now sets your maximum tariff/subvention rate, which each tariff or subvention level applies a multiplier to. For example, high tariffs apply 50% of the maximum rate. Okay, I always love to see more ability to control the tariffs, definitely gonna be happy about that, but we'll see kind of what these little controls exactly look like. And also we'll see what a subvention is, I don't know what that is. Tariffs, just as before, collect a fee from your trade centers for each good of the relevant type exported or imported, and so effectively serve to reduce trade volumes of that good by making it less profitable to trade. Subventions function in the exact opposite way, paying the trade center a certain amount of money for each unit traded in the directed direction, and can be used in a variety of ways, such as subsidizing a critical import of military goods, and to bust out the competition for one of your principal exports. I really appreciate this, whatever the subventions. I never heard the term before in my life, but it sounds really cool. I like this because it means that I can start crashing people's economies. I made a video a long time ago as America, very early patch of Victoria 3, where I exported so many clothes to Britain that it was crashing their price so heavily that their own textile mills were firing people. And that was one of the coolest Victoria 3 moments I ever experienced. I wish I could have it back because trade has since been nerfed into the ground by Mappy, so that sucks. But having this system for subventions means I can maybe make it happen again, because what I can do is I can make so many clothes and then I can trade them to Britain, and even if it's unprofitable, I can just subvention it, so that way I pay money from my budget in order to force through even more clothes into the British market and maybe completely destroy their textile mills. We'll see what the system looks like, of course, but I'm very much looking forward to this in concept. Again, like always, concepts do not always mean good game mechanics, but this sounds good to me. We see a picture now of some coffee with a bunch of buttons, and it says, this almost a slider interface for tariffs and subventions is 100% placeholder and will be replaced with something better before release, but gives you an idea of the expanded options available. So I won't lie, why can't it just be a slider? Just gonna put that out there. No further comment. Wiz goes on to say, alright, I think that should suffice to give you an overview of the world market. I do want to emphasize that this feature is still under development, and there are some key questions we have not yet figured out, such as the issues with overlarge market areas. Before I sign off, I will leave you with a couple screenshots from an endgame world market in the current build. Okay, So we see world market, and we see a bunch of goods. 20,000 coal being exported, 21,000 being imported. I see Britain, I see a Torah, which I think is like New Zealand or whatever. I see Russia, I see the United Netherlands, I see Spain, I see Italy, I see the Belgium. Well, I see Belgium as well. So that's interesting. There exists a Belgium while there also exists the United Netherlands. Always weird. And yeah, this looks pretty good. It's a large quantity of goods. This is definitely good to see that the AI is making a lot of stuff. I will say that lately, I've been noticing the AI is actually much better at making economies than it used to be. So I think we can expect that with the current level of AI, they might actually produce enough goods to reasonably affect the world market, which is nice. But yeah, this looks fine to me. Looks like an okay UI. They might change it up eventually, because of course this is all work in progress, but I like how it looks. We also see another picture, which shows the participants in the world market, and we see that there's basically importers and exporters. Naturally, the British have a massive export market, which makes sense, and then the Belgians are importing a lot. I don't know what the game situation looks like such that the Belgians are importing that much, but it's interesting. We also see that the Orisons, which is a strange tag, you don't often see them get big like this. The Orisons are importing and exporting at second place in the world, so that's pretty interesting. And we also see a list of all the markets at the bottom as well. So we see there's a list of like the imports in the British market and all this kind of stuff. Cool to see, definitely cool to see in terms of information. But anyway, we kind of wrap up here. As Wiz says, that's all for now. However, we'll be back in just a few days on Monday, March 31st, to talk about Expansion Pass 2 and what's coming next for Victoria 3. Well, damn. I mean, pretty cool. I'm interested to see where they go with this. We don't have a whole lot to go off of here, in the sense that the very particulars of how the system will play out is very much unknown to us. The level of importance that this will give to trade is also unknown, because I'm not sure, again, the world market is good. I'm glad to see that. But we'll see kind of how much like this impacts your production. Right now, obviously, trade plays a very small role in your production in terms of what you choose to make. But with the world market, I mean, maybe we can see particular countries really gaining a strong competitive trade advantage and actually taking over the world market in certain ways. So what do I think of this dev diary overall? I guess we'll call this like the concluding section. Well, I'm scared of performance problems, like I mentioned before. This is going to be a lot of calculations happening really often. And that is always worrisome, because performance in Victoria 3 is already bad enough. Having it be even worse is only scarier than I could even imagine. But I like the ideas they're putting forward here. I like that trade is actually being focused on, because trade is very important in terms of the era, and it's also an interesting game mechanic, and it's honestly a pivotal part of the economic theory that the Victoria 3 game itself derives its economics from. I think it could also be good for creating a more diverse ways to play the game. Right now, every time you play the game, you more or less play like a total autarky, in the sense that you're just keeping all your goods to yourself, producing domestically, consuming domestically, and if you trade, then you do, but it doesn't really impact very much at all. The explicit exception is like exporting opium to Qing, where like, yes, you can actually like crash your economy by losing access to Qing's market, but regardless, this is good. This is good changes. I like what they're going for here. It's just going to matter how they implement it. I'm always cautious to praise anything before I see its implementation, so let's give it some time, see what they do, and I'm excited to see what they do on March 31st. We'll see what the expansion is like. Here's our predictions. I'm going to try to think, what could they possibly expand on? What I'm hoping for is a DLC about like diplomatic plays. I doubt we're going to get that though. Instead, what we might see is a DLC for, honestly, maybe for like the United States, or for like Britain, like a great power like flavor pack or something. I say this because if we're focusing on trade is kind of the domain of the greatest powers, in the sense that like you're doing the most trading as a great power because you have the most goods to trade. It could be interesting to see a DLC that focuses on great power politics, in the sense of like intimidation mechanics and ways to screw over your rivals in ways that aren't just war. We'll see what they choose to do. That's kind of where my mind is going, is like, if you're doing trade, then maybe you're doing great power stuff too. We'll see. Could be totally wrong. I have no real reason to actually believe that's going to be what they end up doing. Regardless, I hope that you found my reading of this dev diary insightful, and I hope to see you for the next one. Thank you for your time.